right off the bat, if I'm to ask you, how much of the fuel market in South Africa would you say is quote unquote proudly South African? I'll give you like a moment to think about this. Okay, so it's an obvious fact that fuel has been rising over the past couple of months, and chances are it's probably going to continue increasing. So as this happens, you see that there's a lot of calls to the government to step in. You know, people they can't really afford these continuous increments. Of course, there is the war in Russia and Ukraine that's also leading the fuel prices to increase rapidly. So many people are calling on the government to step in. You know, how do we keep this low so it's affordable? During the course of this video, what I'm looking to achieve is at least maybe highlight some of the biggest winners as the fuel prices are going to be increasing maybe into the near future too. And if you're watching this, chances are this very weak fuel might increase. If not, maybe in the next month it's going to do so. So back to the initial question: how much of the fuel market in South Africa would you consider proudly South African? The short answer to that is not much, or close to none, I must say. If you have watched some of my videos, you might realize that I've taken a slightly different perspective in this case. I normally focus on listed companies, specifically the ones on the JSE, just to shed some light on those. But today I'm sharing a different perspective. However, the content would remain pretty much the same. Because of the 7 companies that I'll be looking at, 5 of them are listed companies, one of them being listed in South Africa, and then some of them mainly listed on the New York Stock Exchange, and then some of them on the EURONEXT in Amsterdam. So right off the bat, the very first fuel company that we're going to be looking at is Puma Energy. So I'm going to be looking at the smallest all the way to the biggest. You actually be surprised who happens to be the biggest player in the market in South Africa. So Puma Energies, this is a very new player to the South African market. They only opened their first service station around about 2015, and as we speak, they've got about 135 service stations across the country. They might seem small, but when you consider that they're also operating in over 40 countries, yes, 40 countries, and Puma Energies is the only private company that's on this list. So they're headquartered in Switzerland, and they were incorporated in Singapore. So every time you go and get fuel at Puma service station, at the back of your mind you must remember that when you swipe that cash, a part of it is going all the way to Singapore, and some of it is going to end somewhere in Geneva, Switzerland. So this is the first and the smallest on the list. All right, and then number two on the list, this is the only company on the list that has got South African roots or South African history, if I can put it like that. So number 2 on the list is Sasol. Sasol is actually quite a big player in the international market. They operate in over 30 countries, and as we speak, they are listed both on the JSE and also on the New York Stock Exchange. And when it comes to the number of fuel stations that they have across the country, we're talking of about 360 service stations, and this is one of the only fuel or service stations that's predominantly from South Africa. So that's number 2 on the list. And on to number 3. Number 3 is Total. I'm sure most of us have seen this, or at least got fuel from there at some point in our lives. So Total is a French multinational oil and gas company. They are listed both on the New York Stock Exchange and also on the EURONEXT in Amsterdam. They are quite a huge player also in the fuel market, and they've got quite a long history of their operations in South Africa. So as we speak, Total has got about 537 service stations across the country. That's how huge they are. 537. So remember, when you do go to a Total service station and you get fuel there, most of the money, chances are, is going to flow all the way to Paris. That's where they are headquartered. So yeah, and the huge chunk is of course going to go to the government in forms of taxes. I'll touch a bit on that later on. Number four on the list. Number four on the list is my go-to service station. This is Shell. So Shell was actually a merger between the Shell Transport and Trading Company and Royal Dutch Petroleum. So as we know it today, it is called Shell. Shell is headquartered in the United Kingdom. In terms of their size, Shell is actually quite huge. They are the 45th largest company in the world. Number 45. So Shell is indeed huge. They do have quite a strong presence in South Africa as we speak. They've got about 640 service stations spread across the country. So I won't even touch into the refineries and all of that. So during the course of this video, this is the only part that I'm focusing on, the service stations, because mostly that's what we as consumers interact with. When it comes to the listing status, Shell is listed on the New York Stock Exchange and also on the EURONEXT stock exchange, and so are they listed on the London Stock Exchange. So Shell is indeed quite a huge player globally, just like any of the companies that I'm going to be looking at. So yeah, that's on the fourth place for us. That's, number five on our list is going to be Caltex. So yeah, Caltex is just a brand name that's used by the Chevron Corporation. So Chevron used to be one of the companies that branched off of Standard Oil. This is the oil company that was founded by one of the richest men to ever live, which is John D. Rockefeller. So Caltex has got quite a huge presence in the country, and when you're looking at the parent company, which is Chevron, they've got a huge presence globally, and they operate in well over 80 countries. And this is also a publicly listed company. They are listed on the New York Stock Exchange as Chevron. So when you look at their presence in South Africa currently, using their brand name Caltex, Caltex has got well over 800 service stations spread all the way across South Africa. So that's going to be number 5 for us. That's Caltex. On to number 6. So this is something we all have seen or maybe heard of. This is BP. BP, when I was looking at the numbers, I was actually quite surprised, because initially I saw a very low number, talking of like 600, and then when I'm looking at the official site, they're looking at just over 1,000 service stations. So BP also is not a South African brand. It is right in the name, BP, which is British Petroleum. So this is the second company on the list that's also from the United Kingdom. They've got quite a huge presence globally. As I mentioned, in South Africa, we're looking at, according to their site, about 1,044 service stations spread across the country. So BP is huge, and they are also a publicly listed company on the London Stock Exchange. I'll just confirm, I think also on the EURONEXT and the New York Stock Exchange. So that's going to be number 6 for us, BP, British Petroleum. And then the last one, lucky number 7, and definitely not the least. This is by far the biggest service station in the country. You'll actually be surprised who happens to be the owner of this. This is actually the only service stations that's owned by a government. By a government, I'm not referring to the South African government. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I'm referring to NYSE. Yes, NYSE is the biggest service station in terms of reach in the country. So about the government that owns it, Engen is actually owned indirectly by the Malaysian government. So they've got a private company called PetroSA, which is the one that sponsors the F1. If you watched F1, they do, I think, support or sponsor the Mercedes team. So that private company, PetroSA, is 100% owned by the Malaysian government. And then in South Africa, PetroSA has got about a 70-75% stake in Engen service stations that are spread across the country. The remaining 20-25% of Engen South Africa is owned by Pembani and the Pembani-led consortium. With regards to who owns that, I think you are more than welcome to to look that up and check out who or what is the Pembani-led consortium. So yeah, these are the 7 biggest fuel players in the country. Okay, now that we've got to the end of this video, going back to initially what I did ask, how much of the market would you consider proudly South African? As we have seen, not much, as about 92% of the market, or just upwards of 90%, is dominated by these 7 companies that we briefly looked at today. So that being said, as fuel prices probably continue to go up in the near term, these are most likely going to be the biggest winners or the beneficiaries as their revenues are supposed to increase. I know we'll be lobbying the government to say, okay, please step in. Let's what can you do to reduce the fuel prices? Granted that about 30+% of the fuel price that you pay at the pump is government levies and taxes. So the actual fuel price you should be paying is actually less than, just under 50%, about 48-49% of what you're seeing at the pump. When it comes to these increments, unfortunately, we'll be at the mercy of multinational corporations who, in most cases, the people working there have got no real connection to what's happening in South Africa or like at ground level. Yes, they do of course have employees here and stuff like that, but the most important decisions will be made from the higher ups. So yeah, that being said, I hope this managed to shed a bit of light or gave you at least a very brief introduction to the fuel market and how it is comprised and who are the biggest players. That being said, there's like 7% that's still left, and that's left to smaller and independent retailers across the country, and the smaller players are fighting for that, while the biggest winners have already taken the biggest chunk of the market. I really hope this was informative, and if you like this, please do give this a thumbs up, and I'm hoping to be sharing similar videos in the near future. Thank you for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.